Christianity ended in 70 AD, part 12. Whenever we're reading the Bible, we have to read it the way it was written. Audience relevance is what they call it. Think about who was being written to. Now, if the Bible was supposed to be made, if the New Testament was supposed to be put together, the apostles would have done that. They would have said, hey, save these letters. They wouldn't have just treated the letters so randomly. They would have been like, save these, we're going to put them together. This is for people thousands of years from now. But you can tell that this Bible was made by Romans, people that were left behind, Greeks, You can tell because they put Romans first after the book of Acts. Romans shouldn't be first. Paul never made it to Rome until the end of his life, whenever he's thrown in prison. That shouldn't be there right after Acts. So you can tell who put it together. These people translated it and all this. They weren't good people. They didn't understand the truth. They were people that were left behind, and then people centuries later. But what did he say to Rome? He said, I thank my God your faith is heard throughout the entire world. The entire world. Right? This has nothing to do with us today. Whenever they were talking about the world, not what we think today. So Romans was written to the Romans, right? Thessalonians was written to the Thessalonians. May God preserve their whole bodies, souls, and spirits until the coming of the Lord. Not ours. They were not in darkness, that day should overtake them as a thief. There's no point in saying that to people that are going to be dead for 2,000 years. Corinthians was written to the people in Corinth. Paul wrote them a letter. This isn't to us, because they wrote a letter to Paul. And Paul wrote back. He said, now concerning the things whereof you've written unto me. So they actually wrote him a letter asking him questions. He got the letter and he said, now I'm going to address the things that you wrote unto me. Then he talks about wives and who should have wives and all this. And then he says, but this I say, brethren, the time is short. Let those who have wives be as though they have none. Why were the Corinthians acting like they didn't have wives? Because the time was short. This was happening in their lifetime. The Bible is not the Word of God to us. It cannot be the Word of God to us. Timothy was supposed to be read by one single person that ever existed. It wasn't written to anybody before him. It wasn't written to anybody after him. It was written to Timothy, and Paul was ready to be offered up whenever he wrote to Timothy. Hey, Timothy, don't forget, bring my cloak that I left in Troas. Definitely bring the parchment. Do your diligence to come before winter. And he told Timothy, he said, keep the commandment that I gave you without spot until the coming of Jesus. Because Timothy would still be alive at the return of Christ, and Paul knew it. He knew what time it was. Peter to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, or the strangers scattered abroad, greetings, the end of all things is at hand. They're looking and hasting to the day of God. Their judgment had long waited, but now will come on them swiftly. James to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, go to now, you rich men. He wrote them a letter. He sent it to them. They read it, and they got scared. Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. He said this to them 2,000 years ago, because they had heaped up treasures for the last days. And then he said they need patience because the coming of the Lord draws nigh. Whenever a Christian today tells me the coming of the Lord is nigh, I say, sorry, I believe James, not you. James grew up with Jesus. He knew him the whole time, even believed his message. I believe James, not you. John writes to the elect lady. Why is that even in the Bible? I can tell you why it's in the Bible. They said, we need more stuff from John in here. And they didn't have any more writings. So they had these little writings of John to the well-beloved Gaius, to the elect lady. Both of those letters are about a paragraph long. They're only written to one single person that ever existed. But they were like, we need more stuff from John, so they just randomly put that in there. And all he says to him is he's basically like, hey guys, what's up? I have a lot to say to you, but I'm not going to write it with ink and pen. I trust to come unto you shortly. He's not coming unto us shortly. Paul's not going to set the rest in order whenever he comes. I think it was the Hebrews. Was it the Hebrews or the Corinthians? He said, gather yourselves together the more so as you see the day approaching. That was to them, not to us. Whenever John writes to them, he says, little children, it's the last hour. You've heard that Antichrist shall come. Even then were there many Antichrists. Thereby they knew it was the last hour. The book of Revelation. He actually sat down and wrote it. Let me ask you a few questions. Did John write the book of Revelation? You'll say yes. Did John send it to 7 churches in Asia? You'll say yes. I'll say, were they blessed for reading those things because the time was at hand? And you'll be like, those that pierced Jesus saw him and wailed because of him. This was written to them, not to us. John was their fellow brother and companion in tribulation. They were going through the tribulation. I'm going to get into what all this was as we go through the series, of course. They were told, hold that fast what you already have until I come. So Christians today will tell you, no, these are time dispensations. Each church is a dispensation of time. Ephesus was, in the hundreds. Smyrna maybe in the 300s. They got all this stuff. But it was the fourth church. To the fourth church, he says, hold that fast what you already have until he comes. Behold, he's coming quickly. His reward is with him. When Revelation was written, there were 7 kings on the beast. 5 had already fallen. 1 was ruling then, and the next one would rule for a short time. Jesus sent his angel to testify to the churches that things must shortly come to pass. Jesus was coming back so quickly that he said, let those who are righteous be righteous still. Let those who are holy be holy still. Let those who are filthy be filthy still. Daniel lived about 500 years before Jesus Christ. Daniel was told, it won't be for many days. Seal up the words of this prophecy. It's not going to be for many days. It's for the time of the end. He said, seal it up. You won't understand it. Then John is told the same things that Daniel's told, and he says, hey, seal not the words of the book of this prophecy, and you are blessed for reading it. And blessed are they who understand. He said that because he said, for the time is at hand. The book of Revelation happened back then. Of course, we'll get into all this as we go. Whenever Jesus is standing on the mount talking to the disciples, it says the apostles came to him privately. Whenever he said that they were going to be delivered up to councils, there would be wars and rumors of wars. They were living during the Pax Romana, the greatest time of peace that the world had ever known, And he said there will be wars and rumors of wars, nations against nations and all this stuff. And there was volcanic activity, earthquakes, everything happened back then, for real. Earthquakes, huge waves, tsunamis, wiping stuff out. They said there were earthquakes so great that they not only shook the earth, but shook the whole heavens. But he told them, he said, whenever you see these things begin to come to pass, lift up your heads, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. You'll be delivered up to councils. Whenever they saw them begin to come to pass, that generation wouldn't pass until all those things were fulfilled. It is crazy. It's like going down to the mailbox and stealing a love letter to somebody else's wife and being like, wow, Sally really loves me. So get this, as we're going through everything that's happening in the Bible, just remember, what was said was written to them. What was said to them. This is to them. If it's for us, it was lies to those people back then, and we shouldn't believe any of it. But everything they said lines up with history perfectly, and everything in the Bible is very plain and understood. Everything in Revelation is understood by the words of Jesus. We know who Babylon was. We know who the beast was. We know who the mark of the beast was. We know who everything was. So the apostles go and they preach this doctrine and they tell everybody how imminent the return of Christ is. And then everything Jesus Christ prophesied about happened in the first century. It happened. He came at the end of the world. He didn't prophesy anything else. People think he prophesied what? Something about America or something? All he ever said was the Jews would fall by the edge of the sword. There'd be great wrath upon that people. The believers would flee Judea whenever the armies came to Jerusalem. All the blood of the prophets would be required at the hands of their generation. Those were the days of vengeance whenever all things written would be fulfilled. These are the things that he said. He didn't prophesy anything else. The temple would be left desolate. Nothing else. He doesn't prophesy anything else. And the book of Revelation is simply only the words that Jesus spoke on earth, and that which is in the Old Testament. But all of them, you can see, are a part of what Jesus said while he was on earth. So that's very important, because we'll go through more. I'll go through a bunch more verses, I might as well. Why not? I can make this as long as I want to make it. Give as much information as I want. I'm actually leaving out a ton of information, because it seems pointless for people to know. But we'll go through all that, do a bunch more videos. Stay tuned for the rest of the series, but remember who's being talked to, who's being spoken to, and we'll go through every single thing that happened, including the entire book of Revelation. Thanks, guys.